So you either love it or you hate it, or you don't mind it. Pretty sure we all heard it before. The Faulconer score, and we know about the ghostwriters, Scott Morgan, Mike Smith, and Julius Dobos. We pretty much know the whole story about that. But today we're going to actually be talking about the sound design of the Faulconer score, and more particularly the synths and what synthesizers I personally use and what is used in the show. And I'll go over that, and I'll also go over a little bit about the guitars. I'm going to go over like the two routes you can go, and the first route is going to be software, if you're going to just use software like VSTs and whatever, and the hardware route, which is using the synthesizers like the QS6, Kurzweil. I don't have a Kurzweil, probably won't get one for a while. I do have a 760 and the QS6. I got like a bunch of synthesizers there. The main thing you need actually for everyone, whether you're going to be using a hardware or software, is going to be a computer, 8 gigs of RAM at least, and lots of hard drive space. Make sure you get a second hard drive so you can like back up your files in case you lose them. The next thing you'll need is a DAW. I'm not going to go over like a DAW-less jam or whatever. I'm going to just stick with the computer program, which I'm going to be using Reaper throughout this tutorial, and maybe FL Studio, because I have FL Studio installed in here, and I'll probably check that out. So yeah, that's pretty much the main things you need. And of course, you'll probably want some headphones like what I have here. Don't get headphones with bass boost or any kind of enhancements, because they won't give you accurate results in the long run when you're doing your mixing and mastering. Another thing I recommend getting is studio monitors like the ones I have here, Mackie CR3s, and these are pretty old. I would get something newer, but just get some monitors like that. And of course, you'll want a MIDI keyboard like this, and that one pretty much I use as the main MIDI keyboard because it makes me helps me write tracks faster. And of course, if you're using a real synthesizer like the QS6, you can use that as a MIDI keyboard too. The other thing you'll need are a bunch of cables like this. This is a TRS or 1/4-inch cable. You'll want at least 2 if you're going to be using the hardware. And of course, you'll need some for your speakers or monitors, whatever you want to call them. And a bunch of MIDI cables. No, actually, you need 2. You'll need 2 MIDI cables. And if you're going the software route, you probably don't need half this stuff. So at the bare minimum, you just need a DAW, like Reaper, GarageBand, whatever, and a computer. That's it. I don't know about mobile stuff. I don't know if you can use GarageBand on your phone and use Soundfont on there. Maybe you can. Let me know. I guess the software guys might need this too. You'll probably want a audio interface. So this is the audio interface I use, and it has 4 inputs. That's more than enough for me. But if you're going to use the hardware synths like the QS6, you'll want 2 inputs. And the reason for that is because it has stereo output. And with stereo output, you can get more wider sounds. On the 760, on certain drums, like the crash cymbal, if you run it through mono, it sounds, like a normal crash. But if you run it through stereo, it has this pan. It has like a panning effect. So it goes left to right, depending on how the velocity is and all that. That is how the Dragon theme has that weird panning cymbal sound throughout the whole song. So the main synthesizers you want is a Alesis QS6. If you can't find that, get a Alesis QS 6.1, 7.1, 8.1, or the QSR. Those can get you close, but the reason I say QS6 is because that specific one has 2 samples on it, or I think it's 3 samples that are specific to that, and I can't find them on the later models. Now, if you have a later model, you can probably use this card here, RAM 512, and it gives you more sounds, and I know they're kind of hard to find sometimes, but that is one of the Q cards, which is pretty much like an expansion for the QS keyboard, and you can use that and it will give you the sounds from the QS6 onto the later models. And I don't know much about the 6.2 or the 6 point or the 7.2, which came out later, like in 2003. I don't know. They're running the same hardware and architecture of the later or the earlier models. So if you do have a later model, please let me know if that Q card will work. So pretty much QS6 in all the tracks, like 80% I'd say, of all the sounds. The other thing to keep in mind is the reason I can't make sound fonts of this keyboard. There's a lot going in this keyboard that can't be recreated through Soundfont. There's so many LFOs, so many filters, and all that, and it's quite hard to recreate that as a sound font. Right here, sound on sound, it has a rundown on the QS6, and if you scroll down, you'll see that all the samples from the QS6 are from these keyboards, and many of these keyboards are modular. So that means you can change many aspects of the sounds, and I know many of them were recorded using Keith Emerson's DX7, and that gives it a unique sound. And because, you know, you'll have to know what exactly they were like patching, what kind of settings they were using, all that on these keyboards and synths and whatever. All these samples from these keyboards were put in the QS6, and they run through the Elisa's hardware, like the LFO, the filters, all that. And that gives it a very unique and distinct sound. You're not gonna be able to recreate that through Soundfont. When I make sound fonts or samples, you're pretty much making a sample of a sample. All these keyboards used by Faulconer and his crew, romplers, I guess is the correct term. And I know there's a few aspects of the sound that you can change, but you know, there's not a lot that you can change. And I'll show you what you can change, at least on the Elisa's keyboard. Like at most, you'll be able to turn off a couple of sounds or change an effects unit that's being used. But that's pretty much it on the Elisa's stuff. Just get a QS6. I know there's also like a Nano Synth or Nano QS or something like that. Right here, QS Sense, Nano Synth. Here's like plenty of other patches here. But yeah, here's the downloads for the sound fonts and the samples right here. And if you're using the hardware stuff, here's the system exclusive files. And you'll use these to get your presets back to factory. That's it on the QS. And then the Roland stuff, you'll want to get these CDs here. Ribbon Section 1. And then Orchestral Family Volume 1 and 2. This one was quite difficult to find, which is the RSA Voices 707. And that has a choir on it that's pretty much used throughout the whole show. You know, I finally found it, and I made a contact file and a EXS file, and you can use that to pretty much recreate the sound. But it won't sound as accurate as it would be, because when you translate the sounds from the Roland format to a modern format, it loses some of the settings. So that's why I prefer to use the 760, and that plays the sounds pretty accurately. And you can of course use the 770 or 750 if you have that or can find it, but they're pretty rare. The Ribbon Section 1, again, most of the sounds are pretty accurate if you use sound fonts or samples or the contact files. They're pretty accurate. If you can't find them, I'm pretty sure there's ISO files and you can use that, but you'll have to download a program called CD Extract or some kind of translator that will translate the Roland format to a modern format. And I'll show you like a brief demonstration later. But yeah, the rhythm section has pretty much all the drums and guitars, all that stuff. And orchestral has strings and trumpets. And these two here are quite unique. They're run through a module called the Zoom 9050. This module is for guitar, and it's quite special because it has a quite unique sound, and it's used in the intro, and it's used as the guitar for Gohan Angers. It's quite unique, and I was trying to recreate it using the Axe effects and a whole bunch of programs and trying to make an impulse response, but I couldn't really get close to it. So the Zoom 9050 is probably something you'll want if you're creating or if you're trying to recreate the Faulconer sound. And I know all these are blue. These are like samples of what the sound will sound like. And for the guitars, you can probably use that as a starting point. If you don't have a Zoom 9050, you can probably, try to recreate it that way. I tried using a program called Isotope Ozone, and I was matching the guitar to this sample here, And I got pretty close. I say isotope ozone gets you pretty close. Right here, the next thing is EMU, or EMU. The Proteus one is the next biggest synthesizer you'll want. I have a EMU Proteus 1 plus orchestral, which has like some of the Proteus 2 sounds. And I know Faulconer said that he used the Proteus 2 at some point, but I have not heard a patch from the Proteus 2 that's used. I think I put one here that might be it. I mean, that might be the only sound that's used, but I don't know. I know the Proteus 2 was used actually in a Dragon Ball score, which was the Dragon Ball GT for the strings. For the Proteus one, you don't really actually have to get the hardware. Many of the sound fonts and samples I found were pretty accurate. The only problem I had was this patch in particular. That was like the computer sounds, or you know, like the sparkly sounds. That sound in particular did not sound like the synthesizer. Like every sound font, every sample I found, it sounded nothing like it. But when I did finally get one of these, you know, I was able to create my own samples, and I put them on the folder, which I'll show you in a minute. So right here, I think it's Proteus 1. Yeah, here it is. Here's the samples. Obviously, you're going to have to cut them up in your own DAW. For the EMU, you can also get a VST called Emulator X, which I'll show you. And that gets you pretty close sounds. Again, most of the stuff you'll be able to find online. Just go download it. Pretty much from here on out, all this stuff, I pretty much use sound fonts or samples. I have no experience with the Kurzweil or the Emulator 2 in particular. I know Liquid Stack, it has its own unique sound font, and it is pretty good. So here it is, I think. Omi Volume 2. Expensive synth stack. That's the sound font you'll want to get that sound. Those were the only two sounds that I could identify that were used in the show, and the sound fonts pretty much get it. It's pretty much the same as the real thing, I suppose. Kurzweil, again, I use sound fonts for that. I don't really mess with I don't have a Kurzweil. I know the one sound font that I had trouble with was this one here, Dawnin. It kind of sounds like the Android 1718 strings, but it's not quite accurate. So I suppose if you have the real thing, you know, you'll probably get it pretty much the same thing as what Scott used. And again, the Kurzweil 2500 was pretty much used by Scott the whole time. But if you really want to get like the, you know, like the Scott Morgan sound, get a K2500. And it also has pretty good sounds for like other stuff too. If you like the Spyro soundtrack, I know that keyboard in particular was used. And here are like samples and stuff. I know they used a few samples here and there throughout the show. Last but not least, you'll want a guitar. Just if you want to get like a Scott Morgan guitar, you'll want a very heavy distortion. And for Bud Geen, I think that's how you say his name. For the intro theme, you'll want like a rock type of sound. Just get a guitar with humbuckers. That's all you'll need. Let's begin with software. Right here, when you get to the chart, I'll also put a link for the downloads. You can move it over here, and there's the sound fonts and samples, and you can click that, and then you'll be here. And you can download them all, and open up your DAW. And I'll show you how to use some of them. Okay, so here we are, and I have pulled up my MIDI from the Ginyu Force theme I made a couple years ago, and I'm going to show you how to use some of the sound fonts, or how to use sound font in general. The main VST I use for sound fonts is for Xando. So I'm going to type that in here, and here we go. I'm going to go to my Roland, or actually Elisa's, because it's an Elisa sound. So if you're not sure, you can go to your charts and you know, search Ginyu, and there it is. Well, that's for the voice. We're doing the synth lead. So here it's bank 4 and it's number 98. We'll go to the download, bank 4, and you know, 98. It's already labeled Ginyu for whatever reason. I forgot why I did that. And you could drop it, and then it sounds pretty accurate to the original. I'm going to open this MIDI file, and I'm going to make sure it is set to channel 1, because most of these are in channel 1. And if you want to connect your keyboard, you can hit this button to arm the track, and then click on this button so you can hear it. And then you're going to click on here and change your input to MIDI. And if you plugged your MIDI keyboard and set it up correctly in your preferred DAW, it should have it here. And right here I have MPK Mini Plus, and I click all channels, and I'm going to hit a key. So there we go. I'm going to go to the settings here real quick. And right here in MIDI devices, if you didn't plug yours in right away, you can click on reset all MIDI devices and see if it will show up here. I have the MIDI here. So I'm actually gonna move it here on the side, and I'm gonna record a new track. I'm actually gonna play it, you know, like the original. Something like that. And you know, it's clipping already. You don't want that. This is how I usually record songs with the MIDI keyboard. I make a loop and then I fix the MIDI, which I'll show you in a minute. And you want to have a metronome on. So let's turn that on and then right click it and check count in before recording. You want that. Okay, so let's record it. Use the right mouse button and then highlight everything and then hit Q, and then we quantize it, and now it's all perfectly aligned. If you want to make it, you know, a little bit sloppier, click on Humanize here. You know, make sure all your notes are selected, and I'm gonna make the timing. Or well, this is the velocity. This is how hard or how soft the key is played or pressed. I'm gonna leave it at 20%. And the timing, you know, if you change it, you'll see the notes and you'll see how different they are. And I'm gonna leave it at 4%. Adjust it slightly, a little bit earlier or a little bit late. I'm gonna choose a little bit earlier at 8%. That sounds good. That makes it sound a little bit more realistic, but I think they used an arpeggiator for that song, so that's not really a good example anyway. And I could actually set this keyboard to use an arpeggiator, so I'm gonna try to do that real quick. Okay, that took a while, but I do actually have the Kai keyboard arpeggiator settings right here for this particular patch, so let's try it. It's done automatically. That's just one way of using the MIDI keyboard. You can also use a mouse and keyboard, you know, if you don't have a MIDI keyboard. That's what I used to do all the time. You know, just draw. And, you know, you'll eventually get the melody or, you know, whatever chord you're trying to make. You might have to do some EQ, especially when it comes to the mix. Let's see if that sounds better. With Soundfont, you're pretty much limited. I'll show you what it sounds like on the real keyboard, and you'll be able to actually tell a difference. There's a big difference. The next program I'm going to show you is the TX16W. So I have my bass loaded up, and you know, it's simple. In this program, you just drag and drop. And I already did that. Here we go. We got the MIDI is set to 1, which I'm pretty sure this is set to 1. Oh, it's actually set to 2. Okay, so I'm not going to mess with this. I'm going to actually go to the program and then change MIDI to number 2. Now, the one thing about this program is it has its own little keyboard. You can do a lot of things with it. You know, you can change the sounds, the decay, the release, all that stuff. I'm going to leave all this alone, actually, because this is pretty much like the stock setting. Of course, you want to set it to out 1. And also, I should mention, if you don't know what MIDI channel is, you can set it to Omni, and it will pretty much read all the MIDI channels. But that may be something that you don't want to do, because you might have like one note that's on channel 3 and then one note that's on channel 4, and you don't want it to like play on this particular instrument. Now obviously that's not the right patch for that particular instrument. There's several basses in that. You gotta do a lot of guesswork when it comes to recreating these sounds or recreating these tracks. And right here, this is the actual bass, you know, the main bass, and it's set to channel 5. So set that to channel 5. Sounds pretty good. Obviously that's not the right bass, because we already know, or at least I know, that it uses this one here. Nose, bass, and pad. It's used a lot in the earlier sounds. There are several versions of that patch, and I'm gonna demonstrate for Sando first. And we're gonna go to Proteus, and then we're gonna drag and drop Proteus here. And with the Proteus sounds, there's like a bunch in one file. Proteus presets 00. And if you go to 01, it's like some weird thing. I don't know what that is. You're gonna scroll down until you get to 72 or 71. And I'm going to use a compressor, or this one's free here. You can also use the built-in Reaper compressors if you want. Sometimes you're going to have to use a compressor or a reverb just to make it sound more like the hardware, or, you know, just in general, because when you're mixing, you're going to be using a lot of these effects and compressors and all that stuff. Make your mix sound a lot better. So another program I mentioned earlier was the Emulator X, and this is the one that was officially released. Looks like it crashed my computer, but that one was officially released by EMU. Now, a lot of these things you can actually find on archive.org. Okay, so right here, I actually found this website. Well, I found this particular link. And, you know, sometimes you're going to come across this. So you're going to be using Internet Archive a lot for a lot of this old stuff. For manuals, ISO files, like I mentioned earlier in the video. So I'm going to click on the emulator EXP sound banks. There is the Proteus 1. Okay, so I loaded them into my Creative Professional folder, and I see him. Let me load him up. This patch right here is the one I was talking about that cannot be recreated for whatever reason. So I'm going to play it real quick. That sounds terrible. And that sounds nothing close to the original. And I don't know why it's like that. But that was an official release from EMU, or Creative Professional in this case. Yeah, it seems everything is in order. So that is pretty much an overview of Emulator X and how you get the emulator sounds. The next thing we want to talk about is the guitars. Again, I use Soundfont for this. Sometimes I use Access files, but I'm going to use Soundfont. So I'm going to go to Roland Samples, Ribbon Instruments, and I'm going to go to Power Chords, and I'm going to drag them here. Let's play that. And I'm going to delete the top. So yeah, that sounds a bit closer to the original. I'll show you the other way with the TX16W. Again, you want to go to wherever you put your access files. And I'm going to delete this program slot. And then, you know, put it right there. And I'm going to put Omni because I don't know which channel it is. That's how I get the sound. I'm going to actually stick with the Soundfont for this one, for the ease. And the one thing I don't use Soundfont is, of course, the drums, which I'm going to show you here in just a second here. Set the guitars here. The reason I use TX16W is because you can have multiple outputs and you can control the drum sound a bit better than with just a Soundfont. So if you're going to use the DBZ kit, I mean, you know, be my guest, it's fine. I would use the DBZ kit version 3, and you have all these sounds. So obviously for a drum kit, you're going to want a kick. R&R kick 1 is what you want. go with the rock snare, which is the basic snare used, the rock snare. And I know they use the yep snare, but the yep snare is quite abrasive, and sometimes it's not used in every song, and I don't think the yep snare is used in this one. And I'm gonna set all these to Omni, and of course you can change them to different outputs. I'm gonna set my snare to 2, and then you can go to options or edit and then build multi-channel route in for, and then that's how you create multiple tracks, so you can have more control over these individual sounds when it comes to mixing. So let me play this. The great thing about those samples is that they actually retain the information of where the drum kick and the snare hit is. B1 is kick, and so is C2. And D2 is snare. You're not always going to remember this, so I recommend you get a MIDI map or look one up. The toms here are called Miami toms, I believe. Let me try this real quick. So I'm going to drag and drop. I know Faulconer used this a lot in the intro theme, and Mike used it in the earlier tracks too. Let's see what we can do here to make it sound more realistic. And the first thing I see here, there's a huge cutoff right here. It's at 3.4 kilohertz. So I'm gonna put it back up to 18 or something like that and see what it sounds like now. That's a lot better. That sounds more like the original. So again, it's one of those patches that don't transfer well from the CD or the ISO file to a modern format. We're gonna do the same thing here with the voices. The RSA voices is pretty much the same thing. You gotta mess around with the cutoff and play around with these settings here, and you'll be doing that too in Contact if you're using the Contact file for this, for the voices. But yeah, I'm gonna leave it like this. This sounds pretty good. I'm gonna turn this off. And the hi-hats I believe they use is pretty much the Brock hi-hat. It's part of the R&R kit. And I'm gonna set it to Omni again and go to sounds, and I'm gonna mess around with the settings until I get something I like. Because again, this is one of those patches that do not transfer well to the modern format. That's a lot closer to the original. I'm gonna go and add a crash symbol 1AM, and that's the mono sound. That's what you want. If you're gonna do something like the Dragon theme where it's like it has that pendant effect, you want the stereo. We pretty much got everything ready, but I'm gonna work with the voices. So with the voices on this track in particular, it uses the voices from the QS6. But I want to try something different here and demonstrate spacey boxes. I'm gonna drag the EXS file in here. I'm gonna set it to Omni, and this is the left side. The thing about this patch is that there's two. I'm gonna put the space R, set it to Omni, and on my sampler, they were set to about 72% on left and right side. So I'm gonna do the same thing. And of course, I'm gonna change the low pass filter. For whatever reason, this patch did not translate well, and I'm going to change that right now. And I'm going to solo it real quick. It has a very long sustain, a very long release. So I'm going to cut that down by just a few seconds. Yeah, that's pretty close, I'd say. The sampler is going to be a lot better. That sounds quite accurate to the original. For Contact, again, you're gonna do the same thing. I have a demo version of Contact, so I can't open both, or I can't load both for whatever reason. And it crashed again. So I'm gonna load this again. Again, it sounds quite weird and it has a very long sustain. It's quite annoying. So I'm gonna scroll down here and I'm gonna find the low pass filter. Here it is. I'm gonna delete it. I don't need it. And I'm going to go down here, go to the release and change that to 4.8 seconds. And of course, there are others like the Elise's samples. As you can see, I have a few samples here. So let's play this. But not every sample is going to be the same. Though what I use is a very simple sampler that comes with Reaper. And I'm going to load the spaceport. So let's play it. It has this long sustain. So the thing with these samples is that you have to pretty much edit them. You have to do it yourself and set them the way you want them to. And it's not always going to be easy, but it's worth it. So what I do is change the mode to note, and I change it. This one's starting at C4, I think. Oh yeah, it says right here, spaceport C4. So I'm going to go to C4. So it starts at 60. And then it ends, well, you can end it whenever you want, really. But technically, it should end at C5 or B5 in this case. But I'm going to leave it the way it is. And I'm going to check obey notes off. And I'm going to enter a new MIDI file. I have C1 to C6, and you can load them all up and have your own little keyboard. Or you can make your own sound font, which I'm going to show you the tools I use to make sound fonts and how I extracted the samples from the CDs. I'm going to show you how to do that. We are pretty much finished with samples and this whole software part. You know, there's a few other samples that are used in the show. If you know how to use a sampler, like the Resample-O-Matic 5000, you pretty much can use it in any of your tracks. And that about wraps it up. So I'm going to go to the subsection of this part of the video, and that is talking about how you can get similar sounds. If you can't afford a QSEditPro, or you don't like the sound fonts or whatever, well, you have a couple options. You can get synthesizers or other hardware synths from the era, from like the late 80s to early 2000s, or you can get VSTs. There's plenty of VSTs from that era that you can use, and there's some from today that emulate that era or that certain sound. Not all of them are gonna be accurate. There is no Elise's QS6 VST. There is no Elise's QS6, you know, official synthesizer like Arturia or something like that. There isn't anything like that, unfortunately. So that's why you have to get the hardware. But there are VSTs that you can get similar sounds. So I'm going to go over one of them. So Synth 1, it's like a modular synth, and it gives you a quite early 2000s, you know, late 80s sound. So yeah, I mean, that isn't exactly the same sound. I was looking for a, you know, like a tinny kind of sound, but I actually like the results. It sounds all right to me. It sounds quite similar to what might have been used during the era. It's not too modern sounding. You want to get something from the era like 80s, you know, early 2000s. One thing I like about the program is it has a particular patch, Acid. So let me turn off my arpeggio. or arpeggiator, I should say. So if you remember in the beginning of the video, I was talking about where the Alesis QSEditPro got the samples from. And one of those samples they got it from was from a synth called the TB303. And the 303 is used for one of the patches for Dragon Ball. And that is Saw 303 MW, something like that. Some crazy weird name. It was quite difficult to recreate that in Soundfont, and I suggested someone to use this program and use this patch in particular. And you know, it's not going to sound exactly the same, unfortunately, but it gets quite close. So yeah, that's one program. Well, I think this one is actually another pretty good one. And I think this is based off a synthesizer from the 2000s, early 2000s. And if you're very experienced with sound design, I would suggest getting this program called Cardinal. And Cardinal is a modular synth. Now, obviously, this is a very different sound from Faulconer and, you know, and even really, this is more like a forgotten future type of sound. But this is a very complicated patch, and this is actually a real patch. This is what, you know, what a patch looks like. Because you're, you know, patching your cables here and all that. And there's like a billion cables here. But it can be quite simple to use to create simple patches. And you can create, you know, whatever you want. I wouldn't recommend this if you're a beginner. That's pretty much it for all the sounds for the hardware or software portion. I'm going to talk about how I got those sounds and how I made sound fonts. So this is going to be like in the middle between the software and hardware portion of the video. So stick around. So we have talked about requirements, what you'll need, and I talked about the software portion of the video if you can't get synths. And I'm going to talk about how I got the sounds from the CDs and all that, and how I made sound fonts. Creating ISO files of these particular disc, the SCSI disc they were called, they were particularly difficult. I had to copy and paste pretty much everything manually using the small screen, so they took a while to get, but I finally got them, and you can find these in the description. I think some of them are incorrectly named. They're not actually piano and mallets. I think there's something else, but the rest of them, they're pretty accurate to the naming convention. The first program I use is called Daemon Tools Lite, and I use it to open the disk, and you're going to get an error, obviously. Just ignore it, click close, and then you're going to get this second program called CD Extract. CD Extract, I got this a while ago. This particular program is used to create the sound fonts and all that stuff from these discs. Let's go to Spacey Voices, and right here is the patch that is used. Click save. You can convert it to whatever type of file you want. And right here, I would always choose EXS24 or Contact. Now the EXS24, I already showed you how to use those files, which was with the TX16W, and the Contact, that's NKI files, and they're pretty much the same when it comes to the conversion process. So you want to set where the patches will go, where the files will go, and where the samples will go. So I usually keep them in the same folder. So I check this, and I create a directory structure, and for program, I click no merge and original, no attenuation, and you want to check the Roland the emphasis. And some people leave this off. I haven't really found much of a difference. I know it cuts the high end a little bit if you check Roland the emphasis. That's something to keep in mind. But if you're gonna do your mix, you probably want to add a little bit of highs. So it's up to you. But after that, you click convert, and then you create your files. And that's how I created these here. And I created a sound font first originally because I thought the sound would transfer correctly, but it did not. So I left it alone. So I never messed with it. But that's how I created sound fonts. You know, click program, bank. You want to choose it on bank. And just leave these settings. They usually convert quite well. So you click convert and that's pretty much it. It only saves whatever you have highlighted. So I highlighted spacey voices. If you wanted to save the whole thing, if you wanted to save all of these files, you would highlight this and then go to save over here on the left column. And then it would create patches or files and samples and all that for all of these performances. So right here, click on disk, convert full disk, and then you can do the whole disk. And sometimes you'll have an issue. Like let's say I open another ISO file. So I want the LCDX01, which is pretty much the rhythm section, but has more instruments. So I just opened it. I go to CD extract and it's not popping up. What I do is just close it and open it again. And there it is. And you would do the same process. If you want to just do one patch, you would click save. If you want to just do one of these volumes, click save here. Or the whole disk, click on disk and then convert full disk. And of course, if you want, you would open your Daemon Tools Lite and then eject these CDs, and I delete the drives, you know, because you don't too many drives. That is how I got the ISO files to turn into sound fonts. I'm going to show you the next part, which is how I made sound fonts. For sound fonts, I use this program called Polyphone Sound Editor. Right here, I recorded these from my QS6. I clicked add sample, and then I would use a tool here called auto loop. I clicked auto loop, and then it would have this loop in. It would do it automatically for me, and I would set what key it was, and I would do that for pretty much all the samples I made. As you can see, it's not just C0 to C7 or 8. I added a few other keys because on certain keys they would sound radically different, and when I played them back on the keyboard or on the sound font, it wouldn't sound correct. So I had to record that specific key to make it sound the same as the keyboard or the real hardware. And that's, you know, just one of the downsides of Soundfont. It can't recreate the hardware processing and all that. In this section, I added an instrument and I called it the same as the real QS6, which is 10 sine lead, and from 0 to 127, which is how many note numbers are in MIDI. Right here is 36, so 36, which is C, and I recorded them in stereo too. That is about it. And then last but not least, I made the preset, which I called Ginyu lead. So I click on this and I created the lead here. And it goes from 12 to 127 for whatever reason, but yeah, that's it. That is how I made the sound fonts. Again, they're quite limited because they only have a few options to mess with. I'm going to end this part of the video. Welcome to the FL Studio part of the video. It's going to be like the same song and everything. I'm going to use the same MIDI. And of course, with FL Studio, you're going to be using a different setup than Reaper. You're going to have to go to your options and set up your keyboards and your audio interface if you have one. And of course, you're going to want to install your VSTs and all that, just like Reaper. Thing I use is for Xando, so simply drag and drop. I'll show you again how I do that. So replace plugins, you know, type in whatever and you'll find it. That is how you do it. And I know with FL Studio it's easier to use the samples. That's one way of using samples in FL Studio, and to be honest, it's easier than using the Resamplo-matic 5000, in my opinion. And I think that's like one advantage that FL Studio has over the other. And also you can use this TX16W for samples too. You can like drag and drop one of these. I don't think I showed you that before, but you're gonna have to set this to, and it's not gonna be the same sound because you gotta adjust it. So yeah, that's one way of doing it. Set in the root. So let's get into the real synthesizers. Here is the Alesis keyboard. This is the main synth behind all of the Dragon Ball Z sounds, the Faulconer score. And like I said in the requirements portion of the video, you'll need a MIDI cable like this here. Well, that's not the MIDI cable. This is actually the power cable. They look quite similar to the MIDI cable. Here's the MIDI cable, and this one's by Roland here. You'll want at least 2 of these, and these will go in the back of the synthesizer. MIDI in and MIDI out, so they go right here where it says MIDI out / through, and make sure the pins align, because if you don't, you might break something here. And of course, you're gonna need power. Your power cable goes somewhere here, and that's what it looks like so far. If you're using a synthesizer that's quite old, like the Alesis, you want to make sure you get the right power supply. And this goes for everything that you'll need in this video, like the Zoom 9050 especially. You want to get the right power supply. And this one here, it's taped off for some reason, but it's from Alesis. It's the original one, and it's rated. You can't see it through the tape on the camera, I don't think, but it's rated for 120 volts. But you want to get the right power supply for your country. With the Zoom 9050, you might have to use a converter. That's something to keep in mind. And it depends on where you bought the synth. If you bought it from Japan or UK, you might want to look and get in a transformer, a step down or step up transformer. Because if you use the wrong voltage, it might not power up, or you might fry your equipment. As a side note, here is what I'm using for the Zoom 9050 and the S760. I'm using this converter here, and this is rated for 100 volts. Right here, it says it right there. And that is standard in Japan. Both the sampler and the Zoom 9050 I got came from Japan, and Japan uses 100 volts. It plugs into the outlet at 120 volts, and then it comes out as 100 volts. This one has 2, and that's something you'll want if you're using both the Zoom 9050 and the S760. And like I mentioned earlier, you'll want these. These are the TRS cables I was talking about. And I plug them in right here. I got 2, one for the left and the right, one for power, and the MIDI in and MIDI out. And I'm going to show you the other side. So right here is where my sound comes through, and it goes into the audio interface. There is the input 1 and input 2. According to Alesis, at least on the manual, it says to run the synthesizer at full volume. So that's what I have. So I have the sliders all the way up, and the MIDI cables are running to the back of the interface, and that's the whole setup. So let's turn this thing on and I'll show you what it can do. So one thing to keep in mind is how the numbers work on this. The numbering scheme on this thing is quite simple. From 0 to 9, that's going to be all piano sounds. 10 is going to be your chromatic, 20 is your organ sounds, so on and so forth. Let's say, for example, you want patch 89. You would hit 8, or 80 in this case, 80. I want patch 89, so I would hit 9. Now I have patch 89. If I want to change the banks, I'll hit the bank button right here, and I could swap through the banks. You mainly want it in program mode because that's where all the sounds are. I think there's a couple on mix, but I really never messed with that. That's how you navigate the Alesis keyboard, and I'll show you how to do it on the program I use. And over here you got the pitch wheel, modulation. I leave it down. Sometimes if you turn it up or move it around, it might change the sounds a bit depending on the patch. And over here, if you want to edit a patch, you can remove and change some sounds. So let me set it up real quick in Reaper. So in Reaper, what I do is create a new track, hit the record and the arm button or the listen button. And then what I choose is input stereo. Because I'm using those two cables, it's going to be stereo. So I'm going to choose input 1 and input 2. It's on. So let me play something here. Some of them are edited in the show, I think. Like, the patch called Ascent has one of the sounds turned off, which I'll show you in just a minute. If you're going to edit any kind of sounds, don't hit the store button unless you want to actually save that patch. If you edit it and you don't like the sound and you didn't press store, just switch to a different patch, turn the keyboard on and off, and then go back to that patch. And it should be back to the factory settings. Otherwise, you're going to have to use the system exclusive file to reset it. So Ascent, you probably heard it before. And I think one of these patches is edited because in one of the songs, that sustained note at the end is turned off. So I'm going to go edit it. So I hit edit select. I'm gonna choose sound 3 because I think that's where it's coming from. So hit sound 3 and turn this off by hitting the value button. So yeah, that's more closer to the songs on the CDs and all that. If you want to, change it back to factory, you can switch to a different bank, turn it on and off. And as you can see, I didn't really hit the store button or save it, so it's back to factory. And as you can hear, it still has that sustained note at the end. So yeah, that's pretty much it about the Alesis keyboard. I mean, I'm not sure what else I could explain. All you need to do is just follow the numbering scheme, and the numbering scheme applies to the sound fonts as well. So, just follow the chart and you might find one of these patches. Okay, so I have this program here called QSEditPro. I'm going to select program mode because that's what we're at. And if you wanted to change it to mix mode, you can do that as well. But I'm going to set it to program mode. You can select your QS model. I'm choosing the QS6 because that's what I'm using. And a great thing about this is you can select your banks here or your presets. So I want preset 1 or bank 1. And I want to use, let's see here, Scarlamere. Let's choose that one here. And I click on it, and my patch or my keyboard should now be set to that patch. If you click this button, it should load up your preset. And it actually tells you the name of the sound. So JPad, Digital 1, these are the names of the samples that are in the system. And here are all the samples of the QS6. And of course, these are the ones that were recorded from those modular synthesizers and all those other drum machines and all that. But yes, all these samples are what makes the QS6. And those are played through the QS6's LFOs and its filters. And I'm going to turn off the white noise. Well, let's choose a different patch. So if for some reason user bank has the same names as preset 1 or bank 1 for some reason. I'm not sure why that is. I'm going to go choose Dreamscape. So here are all the samples that make this sound. Okay, it's a very nice sound, so I'm gonna show you each aspect of the sound. So I'm gonna turn all three of these off. And Synth is one of these samples that is not on the later QS models for whatever reason. So, like I said, you might have to get that QSR or the QS Q card, RAM 512, and it might have it on there. Otherwise, you might have to get a QS6. So, let's play Synth by itself. So it's quite unique. I'm gonna turn that off, and you see, hey, no sounds. But let me turn on number 2. Okay, it's pretty much the same thing. And I think the difference is that one is panned to the right and one is panned to the left, as you can see here. Let's play Rattle Loop. So yeah, that's the Rattle Loop sample. And the strings. And for some reason, the strings don't play. So it might be something that's played in certain conditions. But let me show you the whole patch again by turning all these on. Okay, I hear the strings now, but they're delayed. And that's another thing you can change is the effects of all these modules. And usually the patches and presets and all that I use on the keyboard, I usually leave them stock. That is pretty much it on what I do with QSEdit. There's, a whole bunch of other things you can do with this program, but I really don't mess with it. And of course, if you want to write, you could also do like a MIDI transfer and all that. But I use a different program for the system exclusive files, which is what I'm going to show you now. Okay, so this is MIDI aux. This is the program I use to send system exclusive files. And it is free. It's easy, somewhat easy to use. And the first thing you want to do is go to options, go to MIDI devices. Make sure you check your MIDI input. And my MIDI input is obviously going through my audio interface. And same thing with the output. I'm not using this keyboard or any of these other things, so I'm going to click OK, and it says it's opened. And I already did it before, so you can ignore this other stuff. But if you want to test it, play something on your keyboard. And it gives you a description of what's going on in the keyboard. Let us show you how I do my system exclusive file. So what I do is click send a system exclusive file to the MIDI out, and then I go to wherever I have my releases. So here we go. These are the system exclusive files that I found on the archive website. So it will show up as SYX. So I just click OK. I'm going to do bank 1 and reset it back to the factory settings. And it should take a minute. And on your keyboard, you should see receiving MIDI data. So yeah, that's pretty much how I do it. That's how I reset it to factory. And the same process applies to the QSR. Of course, if you send the QS6 system exclusive file to the QSR, it will work. However, those patches that I mentioned, like Dreamscape I think Gritty doesn't work either. Those patches will not work because they're missing the samples. And unless you have those cue cards, I don't think you'll be able to use those samples correctly. That is about it on this QS6. Of course, I can, demonstrate more sounds and all that, but the sound chart has a pretty good portion of those sounds on there, and you can find them. There's plenty of sound fonts. Of course, they're not always going to be accurate. Let us move on to the next synthesizer. Okay, so here I have the next synthesizer, which is the Proteus 1. And it pretty much is the same setup. Like I said, I use the two MIDI inputs, which is MIDI in and MIDI out. And on this one, it has a separate one, which is through input. So if you're going to do it like a daisy chain, if you're going to connect another synthesizer to it, you can use that. Of course, on the Lisa's QS6, the through and the in were, or the through and the output were combined. On this one, it's separate. And of course, the two quarter jack cables are here. And if you want mono, you're going to use the right channel. And if you want stereo, you're obviously going to have both of them in. And this one here has a rating of 100 to 250 volts. So this pretty much works in every single country. You don't have to worry about using a transformer or anything. And I'm using like a basic cable. I don't know if this is like this is the one that came with it, and this is a module, so it does not have a keyboard or anything. You're gonna have to use a MIDI cable or MIDI keyboard, or use the mouse and keyboard inside your DAW to control it. I'm gonna show you how to do that real quick. Like I showed you earlier with the MIDI keyboard, what you're gonna do is go to Reaper or FL Studio, whatever you're using, and you're gonna set the input of your track or instrument to your keyboard or virtual keyboard or whatever you're using. But in this case, I'm going to be using that keyboard I showed you, which is this one here, and I'm going to set it to all channels. And you're going to turn your track to armed and turn the recording monitoring on, and I'm going to turn this module on. So again, I don't really mess with these settings. You can read the manual if you want to edit the sounds and all that. I mainly keep them at stock. But here's the power button. Let me turn this on. Okay, here we go. So we got Hall strings, record arm, and record monitoring. And I'm going to turn those on. And I'm going to do another one of those. Create another track, turn those on. And since I'm using the two outputs, I'm going to choose stereo. And choose output. And you're going to send it out of the audio interface, which is over there. Remember those two MIDI cables? Well, one of them is going out into here. So I'm going to choose MIDI out. That should have everything set up. And that's what I do for pretty much all the synthesizers. When I make music, I write the MIDI, and then I put the MIDI here on this track, which will read it, and then it sends it out from those cables, the MIDI cables, into the synthesizer, and then back to the audio interface. And that's how I set these tracks up. So input, output, MIDI out. This is armed and recording monitoring is on. And the synthesizer is on for recording as well. So let's play it. Like I said, you don't really need this module. If you want to get that Faulconer sound, again, the sound fonts and most of the other stuff sounds pretty good. Except for one of these patches, which I'm going to show you. Right here is the knob to switch the patches, and you just roll it. So this is the patch I was talking about. That's pretty hard to recreate with sound fonts. And I did create like a long sample that you could use and chop up and do whatever with it. So yeah, that's pretty much it. That's all I have on the Proteus one. Again, refer to the user manual if you want to know how to change the certain aspects of the sound. You can, use those edit buttons. But I don't think I ever actually use these buttons at all. I usually leave all the stock sounds. And of course, if you want to do a factory reset, there is a way to do it. And I think you have to hold the power button and the master button, but I might be wrong on that. Whole bunch of tutorials on this particular module. So I'm going to show you the Roland stuff next. Now this is the Roland 7S60. And again, I have it set up just like the other synthesizers. I have two outputs right here for left and right channels. And of course, the two MIDI cables, and this is going to be a different one here. This is a SCSI, Zulu SCSI device. And what this does is it contains the samples and all the sounds from whatever CDs or ISO files, and it's put on this little, very small SD card right here. And this SD card contains all the samples from whatever CD, whatever ISO file you use. And it is inserted into this Zulu SCSI device. And this device is what I use to extract the sounds from those old SCSI discs. And it's also what I use to load in new sounds. This device in particular, it uses a DB25 and it plugs into here. So that's a DB25 male end on the device, and then a DB25 female end on the 760. And of course I have these here. This is for a mouse. It's a MX1 mouse. And for the TV, for a monitor. But I could not get the monitor to work, so I could not try out the mouse, so I'm stuck with using the little screen on the 760. If you want to get a monitor, or you want to get to use the monitor, you will need this expansion right here that has the mouse and the S-video and the digital RGB. Most S760s do not have this expansion port, so if you don't have it, you won't be able to use that mouse or keyboard, or monitor I should say. Okay, so powering this thing on, like I said before, this is a sampler that came from Japan. So I am using that transformer here to convert it to 100 volts. So let me turn this on. Okay, it's on. So I'm going to turn on the 760. And the 760 takes a while to turn on. But because I have the Zulu SCSI set up correctly, it only takes, about 30, maybe 15 seconds. Oh no, actually less than that. It already loaded. So I'm going to show you the rundown on how to use this thing with a little small screen. So using this thing was kind of a pain, especially when I first learned it. So what you have here are a bunch of buttons. I'm not going to go through every single one because there's a bunch of manuals and stuff. But here's your volume control and your recording level, which is over here for some reason. But I don't really mess with that because I'm recording the output. So I mainly use this volume control in case I really need it. But it's usually set to max. But if you remember the Zulu SCSI device, like on the back of the sampler here, that contains all the sounds that we're going to use. And a sampler does not have sounds like the synthesizers. What a sampler does, it plays samples back. And many of the Roland samples sound better when they're played through a Roland. I'm going to show you how to load them. Once you have your samples loaded in the back, what you're going to do is go to mode, and I go to disk because this is acting as a disk. That Zulu SCSI device acts like a disk. And to select or to move up, you just use these arrows here. This goes up or down. And what I want to scroll down to or move down to is disk. And then to select something, you hit S1 or S1/descend. And there we go. It is reading what's on the disk. But once you get your ISO files and all that stuff on your Zulu SCSI device, I hit Shift. And then I think this is supposed to be home, but like the button's faded a bit. So Shift Home. And it should take you to the top. And right here, you can see it says Performance, All, and you want to use your arrow keys to go to the right, to go to CD. And it's quite laggy for some reason. But once it's highlighted, you're going to hit S1 to select it. So that's like your OK button. So let's wait a minute. Okay, here we go. And since I already have all these ISO files already that I showed you, I'm going to choose the voice, which I believe is HD0. So again, using the arrow keys, and then you hit S1 to select it. Okay, and now I'm going to go find whichever patch, or in this case, they're called performances. So I'm going to go to the performance that I want. Of course, you can also scroll up and go to performance, and you can change it to patches, partials, or samples. And you know, samples is just one sound, and there's a million of them. And partials, you know, it usually has like 2 or 3. Patches, you know, it's kind of like the same thing. But performances is what you want, because they usually have the most those are what we would call presets on the QS keyboard. So I'm going to scroll down until I see spacey voxes. And I'm going to hit S1 to select it. And you'll see a little check mark right there. And you're going to hit load. So I think load here is F3. So yes, as you can see it loaded. And I'm going to go, and if I really want another performance I want to get, I would go up, so hit S1, and then I'm going to hit F3 to load it, and it's going to ask you if you want to clear any files before loading. And what this means is that it already has the performance files, like the ones we just chose few seconds ago, and if you want to clear them. So in this case, we don't want to clear them because we might use them, but keep in mind that the sampler has limited memory, so sometimes you may want to clear them because you can only load so many samples and play them back. So in this case, I'm going to hit no, and you know, these 3 buttons here correlate with these 3 buttons here. So no is going to be the middle button, or in this case F2. So I hit no, and it's loaded. And it says if I want to overwrite it, I'm going to hit no. And you know it's working because the Zulu SCSI device it blinks red when it does the loading and the reading and writing and all that stuff. I have 2 performances loaded, or patches, presets, whatever you want to call them. So I'm going to go back to the first menu we saw when I first turned this thing on. So to do that, I go to mode, and then in the menu, I'm going to go scroll up. For some reason, I didn't do that because I hit the wrong button. And we're going to use the arrow keys to go up to performance, then S1. And here we go. We got our performances here. And I'm going to hit S1 up here when the performance name is highlighted. And then I can switch between these two by hitting S1. So if I want to play the perk voices, I would do that. And if you remember, I already have my Reaper set up to work with these devices. So I'm going to play the S60 using that keyboard. So let me try that. And it's a nice sound. I like it. But this is not the DBZ choir sound you heard all over the show. So I'm gonna hit S1 again. And I'm gonna go to spacey boxes. And I'm gonna highlight that and with the arrow keys and then hit S1. And it's clipping a little bit. So I'm gonna, since I'm too lazy to move the faders over there, I'm gonna move the fader here. But yeah, that's pretty much the sound, and that's how I play it. And again, with drums, we're gonna go through the same process. So let's do that real quick. So I go to mode, and then I go to my disc, and I use the arrow keys to highlight this, HD0, select, and then I have a bunch of ISO files here. So I have the, obviously that's the startup, that's like the OS of the sampler, and that has no sounds on it, obviously. I have the rhythm section instruments, which has all the guitars, drums, and stuff. And the strings, I think that's the orchestral family volume 1, and then brass, which is volume 2. And then this one, I think it's one of the SCSI CDs I loaded here. So let's play around with one of these here. And I'm gonna choose key digital EPs. And I hit S1 and there's a check mark. And to load, I use the F3 button. And I'm gonna clear it. I'm gonna clear all the previous patches that I put. So I'm gonna hit yes by hitting F1. It should be loaded now. So I'm gonna go to mode. Use the arrow keys, go to performance. And if, as you can see, the spacey voices are gone, as well as the other patch, because we just cleared the memory. And you can only use a few patches, like I said before. And I'm changing the number by using these S2 and S1 keys, or increase and decrease. And I'm gonna make this one here 1. So now it's set to channel 1, and we'll be able to hear whatever this is. Profit stack. And I'm gonna show you the guitars and all that stuff. So here is R&R Kit 2, or R&R Kit 1. And that's the one that's used a lot in Dragon Ball Z. So I'm gonna hit S1 to give it a check. Load it, and I'm going to clear the previous files again. And this one should take a while to load. So as you can see, here's the SCSI device blinking because it's loading these files. And it looks like it's done already. So I'm going to go back to mode, select performance. And the good thing about these drums is that they're already loaded up. So let us play these drums. So that's the drum kit that's used in DBZ. And if you remember me telling you about the crash cymbal and the pattern effect, I'm going to do that right now. And I'm going to show you what it sounds like in mono. If you were looking at Reaper and looking at the audio bars, you can see there's like a slight pan effect, and that's what it's like in the Dragon theme. So I'm gonna unplug one of these TRS cables, and I'm going to play that sound in mono. So yeah, it sounds like a normal crash when it's in mono. So I'm going to go back to mode, and I'm going to set up the guitars so I can show you the Zoom 9050. So let me do that real quick. So again, we're using the arrow keys and the S1 buttons and all that stuff. And I think guitars are like all the way on the bottom for some reason in this. So I have it checked. So I use the S1 button to check it. And now I'm going to load it by using F3. And we're going to go to mode again and then go back to performance. And we have a bunch of patches here. So remember what we want for the DBZ sound. You either want U20 and Saint Crunch, which is using like the Gohan powers up theme. I'm not sure if you're supposed to do this. I'm not doing it the correct way. What I do is just put this channel like somewhere high, and then for the U20 power, I set it to channel 1. So whatever patch I'm using, I usually set it to channel 1. So let's play it. Yeah, that's the drum or guitars on that. And I'm going to show you the Gohan Powers Up guitar. I always thought it was Power Crunch because it sounded similar, but it, you know, after listening to Saint Crunch again, especially on the actual hardware, it sounds like it might be Saint Crunch. So let me try Saint Crunch. I'll show you the difference between Power Crunch. So I'm gonna increase this to a different channel. So I'm gonna turn on Power Crunch here. Okay, so that's pretty much it on the Roland 760. I know there's a lot that I still haven't gone over, but maybe I'll explain more in a future video if you really want. But that's pretty much the basic rundown, and that's how I use it mainly. And I'm going to set up the U20 power so I can use it with the Zoom 9050. So let me show you how to do that. This is a module that I've used several times to get a certain sound. And it's used a lot throughout the show. And they're quite hard to find. I only found them in Japan. So I'm going to be plugging it again into that transformer. And a few weeks before I recorded this, actually, I had another Zoom 9050 that pretty much stopped working. And I think it's because I was using the 120 volt outlet instead of using a transformer. And it's very hard to find schematics and all the you know, details on this machine. You can only find, well, you can't find that much information, but you can find a bit more information on the Zoom 9030, which was used by 9 Inch Nails, and that is a bit more popular than the Zoom 9050. What I did was swap some of the parts from the old model with this one, and I found out that one of the PCB boards contains like a majority of the sounds, so sometimes you might have to open it up and then check it. Make sure there's no like leakage, make sure the battery's good. If you have a soldering iron, make sure you get like a precise tip and clean up any corroded parts if you have any corrosion, because I know some of these units have corrosion and this unit does not. I know I cleaned it up a little bit and all that, but still it did not have much corrosion. So I'm going to turn this on, and there we go. It's on, and it's already set to afterburner. Look at that. So what's the setup here? So what I have here, I have 2 outputs. So remember those 2 outputs that I use for every synthesizer? Well, those 2 outputs are going into the Zoom 9050. And I only have one output right here. And that is coming out from the mono output of this S760 into the Zoom 9050 right here into the input high Z. And the reason I use in mono is because, well, first, I don't have another cable. I think I do, but I had to look around. But the U20 power patch, it is mono. It's not stereo at all. It does not have any stereo sound, so it doesn't matter. But with the patch, it does have like a stereo output, I believe. So to make sure you have stereo on right here for utility, and the output is set to line and it's set to stereo, which is what we want. So I'm going to hit exit, which is right here. And sometimes I change the volume on here by using this knob, this top left knob. And, you know, it makes it louder sometimes, but I usually leave it around 80%. So let's try it out and, you know, make sure that your input is set correctly, or it may not work. And same setup with Reaper. The only thing we're adding is a FX module. So let me play. So yeah, it's been a while since I played that, but yeah. That is how you get the Zoom 9050 or the DBZ intro sound. And you can also get the Gohan Angers guitar. And that patch in particular is Floyd, or Purple Floyd, I think. Yes, this one. That is patch number 5. So yeah, that's how I get the Zoom 9050 sound. Now before, I used to run it a different way, which I'm going to show you right now. So before I had a 760, I had a way of doing that sound. So what I did was get an XLR cable and plug it into a reamp box, right? And this reamp box would connect to the input of the Zoom 9050. And that XLR cable would connect to, you can't really see it, but it's like the back of the interface, and it is a output. So what's being done is the sound is being sent from this audio interface into here and then into this module. So most of the work is being done in the DAW. So I'm gonna demonstrate right now. So right here, what I did was we're pretty much using the same 2 tracks. So I'm gonna go to the input output button, and we're not sending any MIDI out, we're sending audio. So what I did was go to audio hardware outputs, and we're gonna send it to audio or output 1, or whichever output you used. In my case, I used output 1 on the back of the audio interface. And right here in the master track, I go to this button here and I delete it. And I only set it for, and the reason I'm doing that is because there is a loud screeching sound if you leave audio output 1 and output 2 on here for some reason. So I set it to audio 2. So far what we did was we're sending audio out from here on output 1, and then we deleted the outputs, both outputs on the master track, and we replaced it with one audio output. And right here I have U20 power, so I'm going to play it. And of course, we have the second track, which records the audio coming in. So this audio is going out, and this is the audio that's going in. And it's recorded, or it's receiving MIDI input from my keyboard, so I'm going to use my keyboard to play it. Of course, you lose that one output, which is kind of annoying, but that's the way I did it. So I'm gonna delete this because I don't need it anymore. I recorded my performance, and I'm gonna delete this and set it back to output 1 and output 2. And I'm gonna turn this MIDI off. So I'm gonna hit mute, and we're gonna listen to what it sounds like. Turn off your outputs. That's a very screechy sound. So yeah, there you go. That's how I got the sound. Before I had that S760, I would use the MIDI, send it out through Reaper, and then receive it on a receiving track. And of course, I would only have one output, so that way my ears wouldn't be hurting from all the screeching sounds. And of course, the reamp box helps because it gives you that very clean sound. And the one I'm using is called Pro RMP. And I'm not sure if you will actually need this, but it helps with giving you a more leveled sound from what I heard. So that is it on the Zoom 9050 and the S760. That about wraps up everything. So I'm gonna do a live, or not really live, but I'm just gonna show you the difference between the Soundfont and the real synthesizers. So I'm gonna do like a combo, and it's gonna be the same song that we worked on, which is the Ginyu Force remix that I did. But I'm gonna use all the original synths. I'm not gonna use my guitars or bass or whatever. I'm gonna use the original stuff. And I'm gonna show you the difference between software and then hardware. Okay, so now I'm gonna show you how I get sounds onto the Zulu SCSI device onto the 760. So what I do is take this thing out. Well, you can leave it in actually, but I'm gonna take it out because it's easier at this angle. And on the back of this thing, you'll see there's a little SD card here. So I'm gonna go ahead and remove that. And there's your SD card. And what I do with this SD card is I put it in one of these things here, a micro SD to USB converter. And I just put it in there, and then I plug this in my computer. So let me go put it in right now. So it's plugged in. And when I first got this device, I really didn't do anything to it. I didn't format it. You can get the Zulu SCSI device, and you can get the SD card for a few more dollars. As you can see here, all these are labeled 0 to 5. And the only one that you can't use is HD1. For whatever reason, you can't use that. You're gonna grab your ISO file wherever you download it from. I'll probably put a few links in the description. And if you remember, there was the rhythm section instruments that has all the guitars and drums and all that. And it's on this ISO file. So what I did was rename it and then change the name to HD2. And then I copied it on here. And as you can see, it is 614 megabytes. And it is the same size as this file here. So it's pretty simple. That's how you do it. It's pretty simple. Just drag and drop and then rename it to HD0, HD2, and so on and so forth. I think you can only have 7 discs on here. You can only have 7 because that's the limit for SCSI, or at least on this SCSI device. Okay, so I have my original floppy disk here, and I'm going to insert it into the 760. So I'm going to power that on. And of course, you're going to want to reinsert your SD card and put it into the Zulu SCSI device right here. And then you're going to plug it into the back of the 760. So let's go ahead and do that real quick. I'm going to insert it here. And you're going to want the label to be facing up. And it should just snap in real quick. Should be secured. And I'm going to put it into the back of the unit. And now I'm going to insert the floppy disk. Floppy disk is inserted, so let's power it on. And now we're going to press this button here and just push it, and it should give you a sub menu. Now this is how I copied all the files off the old SCSI disk to the SD card in the Zulu SCSI device in the back. I used this button here to push it, and then I would go to save, and I would save every single patch, partial, and sample onto the SCSI device. Of course, I had to have an empty ISO file, so I made an empty ISO file of about 88 megabytes, and that's why all the RSA disks that I have in the link are about 88 megabytes in size. So we're gonna go down to save system, and you're gonna hit the S1 key. It's gonna have one option here, which is save system, and you're gonna press this one here, F3, and it is write protected because we're set to FDD. So we're gonna have to change this, and I hit save system. And there's obviously an error because I already did this before, but it would usually save it right away. So that's how I got the OS onto the Zulu SCSI device, so that way I can get the faster boot up time and not have to wait for the disk. So I can remove this because I already have the OS loaded. Okay, so once you have that completed, what you want to do, turn on the power and then hold the mode button. And then you should be at this new menu here. And again, it's the same buttons you're going to be using. Okay, so over here, self SCSI ID, I leave it at 1. And then the boot drive is wherever you want your OS to load up. In this case, I actually put the system file on SCSI 5 or HD5. So I'm going to hit exit and then continue the booting process. And of course, number 3 over here is where you can change your setting to the CRT or the mouse, the mouse and the key and the big monitor. Obviously, you need to have the expansion like I showed you in the beginning, and you also need to have a S-video cable or an RGB cable and a compatible monitor, and you'll need an MX1 mouse, a mouse with an MX1 cable. And I do have both of them, but unfortunately my S-video cable does not work with this device for some reason. So that's why I'm still using the panel and the LCD, which is the small screen. So I'm quite limited here. And LCD contrast I leave at 2. I mean, there's no reason to have it brighter or darker. And I'm going to hit exit. And of course, it's going to renew the memory. And it boots up pretty quickly because we have the system OS on the Zulu SCSI device. And normally this would take about 30 seconds, maybe 20. But this only takes, just a couple. And that wraps up the video for all the synthesizers. I'm gonna now, showcase how I make the music, do all the routing and all that stuff. And, I'll just do like the first half of the Ginyu Force theme. And of course, make sure you take care of your synths if you got them. Make sure you're using the right power. Get yourself a little transformer and make sure it's running at the right amperage or voltage, I should say. Get a multimeter. Make sure it's reading at 100 volts or 240, wherever you're located at. Clean your synthesizers. You get a microfiber cloth, dust them. Make sure they don't corrode and rust. I know a lot of these synthesizers, when they get pretty old, they tend to have a lot of problems. Or, just find a guy that can fix your synthesizers. And out of all the synthesizers, well, not even the synthesizers, the only thing here that I can't find much information on is the Zoom 9050. There's no schematics that I could find. There is some, troubleshooting guides, like I said, for the Zoom 9030. That might apply to the 9050. But there isn't much to go about, so you have to do a lot of troubleshooting yourself. So I suggest you get a multimeter and make sure, all the fuses on there are working. Have to make sure everything's grounded in there and that no connections are corroded. But for the other synthesizers, in my experience at least, I haven't had that much trouble with this other gear, especially the Elisa stuff. That wraps it up. So let's get on to the live demonstration, or quote unquote live demonstration. I have the MIDI pulled up for the Ginyu Force theme, and a few people asked me how do I identify sounds and all that. Honestly, what I do is listen to the song over and over again and go through the keyboard and then, play a bunch of random notes until I find a patch that sounds similar. And of course, there was a few other guys that helped, like I said before, like Rakeem and, a whole bunch of other people. I put them in the credits in the downloads folder. And there's other tools that I use now to pretty much split the sound so I can hear the individual sounds by itself. So sometimes I use Splitter, and this is free, and you could separate all the tracks. And you can also use lalal.ai, and this tool, the algorithm on this is a bit more stronger than Splitter. So that is what I use. And most of the Ginyu Force theme is identified. All the sounds are identified. And I'm going to start with the synth lead. Tin sign lead, or synth lead, I guess you could say it. So yeah, there you go. That's the lead. And what I do here, since I have the MIDI out on here, I'm gonna insert a new track, and I'm gonna make this where the audio comes in. I'm gonna disable that. And if you remember, I go to input output, and I'm going to send the output of the MIDI, not the audio, but the MIDI, to the MIDI output of my audio interface. So I'm going to click that, and it seems like it changed my preset to something else. So I'm going to open this MIDI track, and I forget since I made this MIDI, it's been a while, I don't know what bank I used. So what I do is go to lanes with events, and I go to bank program select, and I click here or highlight, whatever, and just delete that because I want to be in control of what the sound is. And I don't think I should change it anymore, so I'm gonna go back. So I press Control R. Make sure it's not clipping. So I'm gonna mess with the audio a little bit. Okay, so yeah, I hit space and then I stopped the recording. Then I click Save All, which you probably didn't catch, but that's how I do it. So I did not see the bass on the chart, and I guess I forgot to put it on there, but volume knob is like a very deep bass sound, and I'm going to use that for the sub bass sound. Before moving on to the next instrument, what I want to do is remove the MIDI output from the first track. So I'm going to click, you can click on this, on the IO button, and then change it to no output here. Or you can right click it and then go to MIDI output and then click none. And I created another track already, so we're gonna make this stereo as well. Why not? Turn on the audio monitoring on, and I'm gonna make sure that there is no banks or anything, and there is. I'm gonna delete that so it doesn't change my preset when it starts playing. And there's nothing else here that I should be worried about. Velocity is fine. I'm not gonna humanize this velocity that much. Maybe on the drums I will. And here it is. It's on bank 4. And it is number 44. highlight all, or you can hit Control A and select them all, and then right click and then go to Note Channel. And as you can see, it's set to channel 2. So you can do either one of two things. You can set it to channel 1, which I usually do, or you can go to your keyboard and change the MIDI channel to channel 2. But you know, it's easier to do it on the DAW, so I set it to channel 1. That's the way I do it. So make sure you save all the time. I almost forgot there for a second. Well, for about 4 minutes, or however long the song was. So I have my bass, I have my lead, and I'm going to disable the MIDI output from the synth bass. And we have the 2 tracks, and I'm going to mute these for now. And I'm going to move on to the voices. Now the voices on the Ginyu theme is a bit different than the voices in like every other song. This uses a voice on the Elisa's keyboard, and I believe it's bank. Oh, it's the MIDI bank right here, 54. So there you go. It sounds pretty good. So I'm gonna record it and just let it play for the whole entirety of it. And of course, you don't have to do the whole recording. You can chop it up and then copy and paste 50 times. But sometimes you don't want to do that because you might change the MIDI. So say for example, I might change the velocity, or I might change the timing of one of these. So it might vary throughout the whole performance. But here, obviously, it's going to sound pretty similar because only the velocity is changing and not the timing or anything. Earlier in the video, if you watched it, I clicked humanize, but I never, set it correctly. But this time I will. I'm going to change the timing maybe just a little bit. Same thing with the velocity. It's going to be slightly different. And I'm going to make it a little bit late, just a little bit. And of course, set it to the right patch, which I just did. So let's play it. Okay, so we're finished pretty much. And I'm going to cut this off a little bit and add a little bit of a fade. And I'm just using the left click to drag this out and add a little bit of a fade. One thing to keep in mind is that many of these patches on the QS6, and another reason why it's hard to recreate it on Soundfont, is that at different velocities, they have different sounds. So this one is at 90. At 90, it sounds okay. When you go to 95, as you go higher, it sounds more muffled. Of course, that's something you might want. Or it's something you don't want. So you might have to go in here and edit it. But I think it gives the synthesizer a bit more character. All the Elisa's QS6 patches have their own quirks that change depending on the velocity. As well as, it's usually the LFO that's doing the changes, or some kind of filter. Which again is why it's hard to recreate that sound in a Soundfont file or a contact file. Okay, so I have my Zoom 9050 set up like a guitar. I have the power and I have one input coming out from the Lisa's QS6. So one of them is coming from this QS6 because I only have one cable, and I think it only accepts one input. Right here, it only accepts one input on the back of the Zoom 9050, but it has multiple outputs. So I have two cables coming out from the Zoom 9050 into the audio interface. So I'm gonna start this thing up, see if it works. So it's on now, and it's set to the previous patch that I had. Okay, so we're finished with this bass section here. Now we are moving on to the last part, which is, of course, the guitar and drums. Okay, so I have the QS6 out again, and I don't know if I told you this, but this thing has, you know, it's about 20 pounds, so it's quite hefty, and, you know, moving it back and forth, you know, I guess it gets a bit tiring, I guess you can say. We have it, and it's ready to go, so let me set the preset to bank 4 and preset 100, I think. So this is the bass sound you probably heard. I'm using the mod wheel to make it a bit more like froggy sounding, or, you know, acidy, I guess you can say. Acid. And if you have the mod wheel all the way down, it has this filter. And I'm going to use this mod wheel to control the sound as I go. And I'm going to record that. So the way I record MIDI with this keyboard is just like the other keyboards, which I go here, I record, and I put input MIDI, and I have this MIDI cable that's coming out. So, and it's going to my interface, so I'm gonna choose record MIDI in. And as you can see, the modulation wheel is being recorded, but there's a problem. It's overriding the MIDI. So what I do here is right click the record button, and I choose record MIDI overdub, and I choose this one here, the MIDI overdub. So let's play it. And if we go to mod wheel, in the lanes with events, it should be right here. That is our whole MIDI performance that is being recorded. And of course, it can also record keys, and also MIDI bank changes and all that, as long as you have the program on record here. Okay, so we're finished. And that's one of the downsides of using hardware, is that you gotta wait for every single track to be recorded. I mean, you don't have to, like I said, you can, you know, copy and paste loops. But if your performance is varied, you're obviously gonna want to record the whole thing, because it's gonna be a bit different throughout the whole performance. I know I didn't label the tracks before, but I recommend you label tracks. So what I do here is I record each part of the drum separately, and I don't know if there's a multi-channel output on the 760. Maybe I'm doing this wrong. Maybe this is, you know, the worst way to do it, or the slowest way to do it. But this is how I do it. So what I do is highlight one part of the drum kit. So in this case, the kick. the kick drum is going to be set to channel 1. So for some reason this is locked. So what I did was go to Note Properties and set it to channel 1. And I'm just going to record one output. I mean, the kick is usually mono instead of stereo. Make sure you turn this on, and we're going to send our MIDI output. And we're just going to send all. It doesn't matter here because on the 760, we're just going to allow the kick to be played, which would be on channel 1. And we're going to set the kick to channel 1 and everything else at channel 2. So let me show you how to do that real quick. So the drum kit I want is this R&R kick, or R&R kit 1. So I'm going to check this. That's checked. And there's another kit actually that has these special toms called Miami toms. And those are used in the Ginyu theme song. In all the Ginyu theme songs and in the intro theme song. And I thought Faulconer was the only one that used them until someone on my YouTube channel said that Miami toms was used in the Ginyu themes. So I didn't know that until recently. So I'm going to check. I know the Miami toms are in this kit here called Video Kit. So I'm going to load these. So yes, you can load more than one kit or performance file. So I'm going to hit load. And we're going to hit yes to clear all the previous samples, which were the guitar samples. And it's loading all the drum kits. So this is set to channel 1. That's what we want. This is set to channel 1 too. That's what we don't want. And while we can record the whole drum kit on one or on one audio file, it will be hard to control certain aspects of it. Like let's say you want a kick that's a little bit quieter on a certain section, or you want a crash that's a bit louder. Well, you won't be able to do that if it's all in one audio track. I mean, you can, but you know, your results may vary. So what I'm going to do is increase the MIDI channels of all of these. So they are all set to channel 2 except the kit. The kick. I keep saying kit instead of kick. Okay, so kick 1 is set at channel 1. And the rest of these are at channel 2. But I'm going to record this snare in stereo to see if there's any, you know, major difference. So here we go. I have the rock kit. And I'm going to turn the kick off by increasing the channel by hitting the increase button, which is S2. And now it's at 2. And I'm going to change this to 1 by hitting the decrease button, or S1. So now rock snare is on channel 1. And for this, actually, I don't have to record the whole part. I can stop it and then move the cursor here to save a little bit of time. So I'm going to do that. But of course, I'm going to set this to stereo because I think the Miami toms are stereo. And for the Miami toms, I'm going to show you how to do that because the R&R kit does not have those. So I'm going to show you how to load them up. I'm going to go to the top and highlight the R&R kit 1, hit S1, and then I'm going to go to the video kit that I showed you earlier. And everything is set to channel 1, obviously, because, you know, it's a drum kit. But I'm going to leave it alone. Because I'm just playing toms, and in the MIDI file, only toms are being played. So I'm not going to mess with the MIDI channels that much. So the longest part is finally finished. There's a lot of mixing to be done. There's a few issues here, but I'm gonna fix that in just a minute here. So I'm gonna organize these tracks first, because if you remember, I mentioned I was going to do a comparison between the sound fonts and the samples, you know, samples you can download on the internet versus the real thing. And I want to showcase that here. So I'm going to organize all my tracks the way I do it on a, you know, a normal remix track or whatever project I'm working on here. And I create these things called buses. And these go underneath the tracks. And I'm gonna uncheck that. And then if you click and hold, you'll see like this little icon. And you can put it right here on the bus track. And these tracks are automatically colored and given an icon because I have installed these things called the SWS extensions. Again, I'm pretty much sending everything to a bus, organizing everything. Okay, so hi. This took a while, but this is how I usually have everything set up. And you can make templates, and it makes it a lot easier. So I'm gonna start mixing. So I'm gonna turn everything down except the bass, bass instrument, which would be the drums. And by bass, I mean B-A-S-E. You know, that's the foundation. So I'm gonna start with the drums. And I believe it needs some compression because at one point it's too quiet. I'm gonna use one of the stock Reaper compressors, which is JS 1175. Again, I'm using free presets. I'm not going to be using the paid ones or anything like that. And I'm going to turn down the threshold, increase the gain a bit. And I usually just cut more than boost. And I make small changes, usually 1 or 2 dB. Except, you know, the low shelf and the high shelf. Again, I just made small changes there. Sometimes, you know, you can turn the fader like 10 or 15 dB down. But in this case, you know, there's only a few instruments. And again, we're going to be changing the rest of it. And now that I have the bass done, the bass or the foundation, I begin adding the other instruments slowly. So this sounds pretty good. I don't think I really need to do like more compression or anything. Again, I could add more stuff if I really want to. I guess I could add like a reverb to the voices here. So I guess I can do that. Let's see. And I can barely hear that saw MW sound. So I'm gonna add a compressor here. I could do even more panning. I guess we couldn't pan these here because in the original, I panned the guitars like 40% left and 40% right. So just to give it space in the mix. So let's see if that sounds any different. So that's it. I'm gonna create a track and I'm gonna call this hardware. Of course, I would usually call it the master bus or something like that. Yes, I don't have a saw MW sound font, so we're gonna have to substitute that with a different sound font. And this is what I did all the time when I didn't have the synthesizers. I would use other plugins like this to try to get a similar sound. And hopefully this sounds quite close. And once again, we can play around with all the settings in there and probably get somewhere close to the original sound, but I'm not gonna mess with it that much. Now I'm gonna do drums. Again, for drums, I don't use Soundfonts anymore. For the drum kits for DBZ, you can use something like SSD sampler, or you know, any kind of sampler that can load sounds. But I'm gonna use this TX16W that I showed you earlier, and I'm gonna load all the EXS files. And I do not want it on one channel, so what I do is go here, go to edit, build multi-channel routing for output, and I'm gonna hit yes. What I do is go open this, set it to the kit to out 1, snare to 2, and hi-hats 3. Okay, so here I have all of them set to different outputs, 1 through 5. And you don't need all these extra channels unless you have extra outputs. But in my case, I don't, so I'm going to delete all these. So let's show you the difference between hardware and software. Of course, it depends on how you use these tools, of course. I mean, just because you only use sound fonts and samples doesn't mean you can't get great results. And just because you use hardware, it doesn't mean that you'll always get good results. So let's hear the difference between them. So I'll start with hardware, and then I'll switch to software, and then I'll mix between the two. So there you have it. That is what the difference is between the hardware and the software. And I don't think one is, better than the other. I think, obviously the synth lead for the Ginyu song is a lot better on the hardware. I mean, it sounds a bit more groovier. And then the one on here, the Soundfont, it sounds to be cut off a little bit. But again, that is the product of the Soundfont. I think I made that a while ago, and it is a sample of a sample. So there is going to be some variations. But does it sound close to the original? Yes, it kind of does in a way. You could even make it sound closer by using a program like Isotope Ozone, like I mentioned before, and use a EQ match to match the EQ to the original song. And, the original song by Mike Smith, of course, and then you'll get the same mix, frequency, and all that. And it will match your EQ, and you might get a better sound, and it might be a bit more accurate with Soundfont if you use that EQ match. So that about wraps up everything for this portion of the video. Now we're at the last part of the video, or tutorial, I guess, whatever. Anyway, this is about guitar. Obviously, for guitar, it was mainly Scott Morgan. I know Bud Gwynn did the intro, and for his tone, you're pretty much going to use like a generic rock kind of tone. I mean, that's pretty much all I'm going to say. I mean, you could just follow this guide, and I'll show you what you could do. And I know for a fact, Scott used something called the VS880FX. It was some kind of unit made by Roland that is used to, it's like a tape recorder or something. And it has a bunch of effects modules, and that's where he gets the distortion for the imperfect cell drums and the distortions for his guitars. And it's a very like early 90s type of sound. It's very digital, very harsh. And here's what I did to kind of recreate that. If I had a isolated guitar, I would be able to create an IR and be able to copy his tone, have like a 95% match or something like that. But this is the closest I could find, and this was by Koi Koi. Yeah, that's the name of the video. Gohan Fight Spice Boys Guitar Amplified. So here's Scott Morgan's guitar. So yes, very harsh type of guitar sound, but it's very unique. I kind of like it. And of course, because there's like the drums in the background, like the cymbals crashing, I can't really get a 100% isolated guitar unless I use something like Splitter or Lala AI. But even then, there's going to be some artifacts that are missing, so it won't sound correct. So the closest, the only way to really get this tone is to get a VS880 FX. Or you can do it my way, which is use a tube screamer. This one's free, TSE808 version 2. And what I do is pretty much leave everything in the middle except for drive. Drive's going to be at 0. And this is a very old amp simulator. I'm not sure why I use this, but it's also by TSE. It's the X30. And this is called the Sovtech, from what I remember. And I put the bass all the way up. I'm not sure why I was doing that. And turned down the low mids. Everything else is at default. What matters is your cab, really. And I downloaded this cab from a plugin pack. and this is from Best Plugins. That's the name of the channel, and he had like a bunch of plugins from a bunch of different bands. And the one I'm choosing is Symphony X Iconoclast. And of course, is the most important part to get that harsh sound. I add a distortion after. So this distortion, makes it a bit grittier. And I put the gain at 10. This is like the default distortion JS plugin. 10 dB on gain, 4 on hardness, and max volume is -16, and choose stereo. And of course, yes, there's 2 guitars, obviously. I'm not sure if Scott recorded 3 or just 2 or 4, but 2 seems to be the basic guitar recording technique that's out there. And I'm using a DI, of course. So I plug in that TRS cable into my audio interface, and I'm not using like an Axe-FX or anything in between. Nothing crazy. It's just going to be a simple guitar. So here's what it sounds on the original. Okay, now here is my version. I mean, it's kind of in the middle, it's kind of there. And again, you can play around with the cab, which is the one that changes the sound a lot. Oh yeah, I'm using Neutron as well to fix the sound a bit. Let me go back to the cabs here. One thing you'll find about mixing and working on songs like this, you'll be playing the role of an audio engineer in a way. You always want to find something that works in the mix, and I think I chose this particular IR because it worked best with the mix. Let's try the Randall 667. I'll do the same thing here. So original. That's pretty much as close as I can get it to Scott Morgan type of tone. It's mainly the distortion that's doing all the hard work of getting that harsh sound. Because if I turn this distortion off, it sounds like a regular guitar. So yeah, it's not very like impressive really. That's how you can get a Bud Gwyn type of tone if you ask me. Just turn off that distortion. Choose like a Marshall type of cab. I'll choose this one. But yeah, obviously this guitar performance isn't that great either because I pretty much recorded it in like one go. And I don't think I edited it that much. I think I only like fixed something here at the end. You obviously want to edit your guitars. I know that's something I never really did until kind of recent, to be honest. Let's show you the distortion. And I think I'm playing it wrong because I think I'm missing an extra note when I play these 2 chords here. Let me play it without distortion. With distortion. So yeah, a lot closer. And I guess we can do like a shootout here. Let's. So it's somewhat close. Let me mute this. I'm gonna mute everything except the guitars and the lead because right here is, if you remember, I showed you Lala AI. Well, I used that to remove the guitars from Gohan Fights Frieza or Fight Spice Boys, whatever. And I removed all the guitars so I could figure out one of the sounds in the lead. And obviously, with the Faulconer sound, lots and lots of patches are actually layered. And this is the one that, this patch, I guess, or these patches were the ones that actually led me into looking into the Faulconer sound, which was the Gohan fights Frieza lead. And it's made up of 3 sounds. I think it's Face Planner, I'm not sure. I think there's another guitar patch called Distortion Guitar and Overdrive Guitar that kind of sound close. But I put Face Planner here. And it's layered with Angry Time. And there was another one that I didn't know that was there. It's called Hero Harmonics. It's played incorrectly in here, but I'm going to show you the isolated track. And you can hear Hero Harmonics, and of course Hero Harmonics is that very like screechy type of sound. So I'm gonna play the song. So if you hear that screechy sound, that's layered with Angry Time and Face Planner. So here's Angry Time. And Face Planner. So yeah, Face Planner, I think there's a little bit too much reverb, so I'm going to turn that off. And it is layered with Hero Harmonics. And yeah, I played it wrong because I think I just copied and pasted all these, and I didn't really do any changes. And it's played differently in the original, but Angry Time and Face Planner play the same thing, I'm pretty sure. And of course, you know, there's no guitars when... So it's pretty much the original without guitars, although you can kind of hear it. So I'm going to play that with the leads, my leads in this case, and my guitars, and see how close it is. That sounds pretty close to the original, and of course I had it panned right, and I forgot to pan it back to the center. Yeah, that's how I do it. That's how I get that Scott Morgan type of tone. Of course, I don't really use that tone, honestly. I use like a, you know, more of like a rock Bud Gwyn type of tone. But I kind of like that tone, so maybe I'll use it in the future for something. And that wraps it up on this whole tutorial video. But if you made it this far, hope you enjoyed it. Of course, make sure you subscribe and hit the like button. And the only reason I'm saying that is so that the button lights up. So I don't really care if you subscribe or like, to be honest. But you can do it if you want. I'm not going to get mad. I'll be glad if you do it. But still, I just want to see the little buttons light up when I say it, which is a new feature YouTube added. Anyway, if you have any questions, you know, make sure you leave a comment. Join the Discord. I'll put like the link in the description and a whole bunch of other links for all of this. And I'll see you in another video maybe. Okay, bye.